From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Well, as always, please forgive me if you're ahead of me on the news. There's always a lag between the time I record these episodes and the time you hear them. So with that little reminder, let's go ahead here. A few thoughts on Venezuela. Of course, the original justification for kidnapping Maduro was that he was a drug runner, and they kept pointing to this organization called Cartel de los Soles, which, as it turns out now, it's not an organization in any way, shape, or form. It's simply a term that describes the drug culture in Venezuela. So it's just like their use of the word Antifa, claiming it's an organization with members and leaders and activities. So I just find this mildly hilarious that they were forced to admit that in court, because, of course, now Nicolas Maduro is in a New York courtroom. And one of the first little bits of news we got out of initial hearings was that the U.S. government had to admit that there's no such thing as an organization called Cartel de los Soles. Just like one of these days when they try to convict someone of being a member of Antifa in a courtroom, they'll have to admit that, oh, Antifa is just a word. It's an idea. Oops. Americans are fleeing Venezuela. It's more violent now since the kidnapping. Gangs are roaming the streets. Americans being told to leave. Their safety can't be guaranteed. American oil companies are saying no thanks to the whole deal. They don't want to take over Venezuela's oil industry. It's a mess. It needs too much modernization. It's too expensive. And the political instability, the violence. So the whole thing is just falling apart. It's a fiasco. Something else, maybe a trivial detail, but I couldn't help but notice. When Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were perp-walked, Celia Flores looked like she'd been beaten to a pulp. Her face was bruised and bandaged. And Maduro was walking with a noticeable limp. The officers perp-walking him had to practically lift him up just a normal step. He couldn't make it on his own. They had to literally lift him 6 inches. He couldn't make the step up. He had just been dancing days before. In fact, that was one of the things reportedly that the Orange Menace hated, that Maduro was dancing too much. Yeah, you remember all the footage? Days before he was kidnapped, he was dancing every day. He was feeling great. And then they perp walk him, and he can barely walk on his own power. And his wife is obviously beat up. This is the leadership of our country, you guys. This is the regime. I don't care how bad Maduro and Celia Flores are. I don't care what they're guilty of. The government I want doesn't beat people up. We're up to 6 oil tankers as of this recording that have been seized. I guess they've already made their first big sale, several $100 million worth of crude sold on the open market by the pirate U.S. regime. That's how things work now. Lord mighty. Representative Salazar of Florida. I'm sorry I forgot her first name. I happened to catch a little interview with her. She's very happy with what's going on in Venezuela. And I recognized her right away because she's the same one who just swore up and down during the last presidential campaign, just guaranteed that the arrests of immigrants would be only violent criminals and not your neighbors. She said if ICE arrested regular folks, she would be vehemently opposed. But she guaranteed that wouldn't happen. Yeah, Salazar of Florida. Brilliant. This regime cares about democracy when they're destroying it right here within our borders. They care about democracy in Venezuela? Forget it. And then the wider story. Why Venezuela? Why now? Why does it seem connected to Greenland? I recommend Craig Unger. He wrote a book. What was it called? Let's see. Oh, yeah. House of Trump, House of Putin. So author Craig Unger, he's got a good Substack going. You should check him out. And he had a really excellent story this week about how the Orange Menace goes back to the mid-'80s with the KGB and the Soviets and with Russia. He's been a stooge pretty much ever since. Those were his Roy Cohn and Roger Stone days, first getting him interested in politics. And I guess the Soviets just loved the idea. They may have been one of the first to float the idea to him about politics. You could be president, Mr. Trump. But the guy is so impressionable. He's such a child. He still is, and he always was. These plans about Venezuela, about Ukraine, about Greenland, about destroying NATO, these are all Kremlin talking points. These are all straight out of Putin and the KGB. And it started back in 1987, his first visit to the Soviet Union. And they praised him up and down. They played him like a string violin. And either he was just convinced that they had a good point, or maybe, I think more likely, he's just simpatico. He liked the idea that he could be a powerful guy and get his riches, and he could manipulate the world, maybe. I think that's probably it. The other theory, of course, is blackmail, which is also a perfectly legitimate theory. The KGB and the Soviets, a long history of compromat, gathering compromising material on their targets and then using them as political stooges. So the attitude about Ukraine and Zelensky, the adventurism in Venezuela and Greenland, really makes so much more sense when you look at it from this angle. So yeah, I recommend checking out Craig Unger. And then one last thing on Greenland, a story that's not getting nearly enough attention because it sounds like conspiracy theory, it sounds crazy, but there's way too much information to ignore. And that is the whole Broligarch thing. Peter Thiel and the rest of them really want Greenland. Greenland is a very rich source for rare earth materials, crucial to the tech industry. And this whole idea of freedom cities. Check out Peter Thiel, freedom cities, techno-fascism, techno-monarchy. They've got this fever dream about setting up these quasi-independent, autonomous tech monarchies, these city-states that are free from international rule. They have no concept of democracy at all. In some way, an old-fashioned company town, where the corporation, headed by the oligarch, billionaire, techno-monarch, has complete reign over this enormous city-state. And everyone living in it lives under their rules. It's a monarchy. It's not a democracy. It's not beholden to any international rules. And I guess, according to the reporting, Thiel and the rest of them, Musk, they write about this, they talk about this on podcasts themselves. That's the thing about some of these stories. You don't have to connect the dots. They come right out and tell us. So apparently Greenland, for them, is a prime location for these so-called freedom cities. So it's a wild story, but to my mind, eminently plausible, especially as the billionaires, the oligarchs, take more power in this age of looming AI. When soon a great percentage of us are going to be literally out of a job and wholly dependent on the powers that be for our very livelihood. However they decide the world should be organized in this new age. Which is why I keep going back to our only solution. And that's people-to-people democracy. That's a complete and entire overthrow of the money-profit system and to the absolute extinction of the species known as billionaire. Let's talk about normalizing, one of the more important words of the second half of this decade. The chaos continues in Minnesota and elsewhere. And every bad thing that happens normalizes the next, even worse thing to happen. And each day brings us worse things. The DOJ is apparently the private law firm, answers only to the Miller-Vogt regime. The FBI is their private police force. No accountability to the people, to Congress, to the courts. ICE and CBP are the regime's private domestic army. Got their own secret police now, well established, normalizing the very idea of all these things. The U.S. military is now a private goon squad for foreign adventures. Congress just a couple days ago failed to pass a bill that would limit the Miller-Vogt imperial presidency, limit the powers of military use. But no, that failed. Congress once again said, okay, we're nothing. We are now the Soviet Duma. Miller, Vogt, Hegseth, Rubio, the oligarchs, with the orange tap-dancing meat puppet out in front. It's all yours. You have all the power. We concede. Now they're threatening the Insurrection Act against Americans employing their constitutional right to protest. And the chaos in Minnesota grows day by day. Reports of other shootings. Another immigrant died in detention. Just reported that earlier this month, a Cuban immigrant who'd lived in the United States for almost 30 years was handcuffed, tackled by guards, placed in a chokehold until he lost consciousness and died. That, according to witnesses, the federal government is lying because that's what they do. The official story is that he was attempting suicide, just like Renee Good was trying to run over an agent with her car. We see the lies clearly when we have videotape. When we don't have videotape, we can safely assume they're lying. One of the more disturbing reports I heard, as I've told you, I monitor, although it's not easy. I flip over to CNN occasionally to see what they're up to. A CNN reporter was telling the story of her ride-along with ICE agents, where they were very respectful. There were no protests. It was all very civilized and peaceful. Of course, they were still asking for papers. They were still detaining people unlawfully. They even arrested a U.S. citizen during her ride-along, who several hours later was able to prove their citizenship. But the reporter's conclusion was to blame all the troubles on the protesters. As long as you comply, everything will be fine. Wolf Blitzer, thank you, great reporting. His co-anchor, an excellent perspective. Yeah, this is the soft version of comply or die, which we've heard from the vice president. We've heard from members of Congress. A family was attacked in their car with tear gas, children inside. A 6-month-old lost consciousness and had to be revived. Lee Stedman of Madison, a social media friend of mine, is doing very good reporting from the Twin Cities. Apparently they're mixing things up. They're consciously putting agents in the field, women, men, agents of color. They're not all in camos anymore. They're in plain clothes. They're mixing in. They're blending in. Unmarked civilian vehicles. Yeah, they're disguising themselves just like the military aircraft that murdered 11 Venezuelans. The aircraft disguised as a civilian plane. A war crime. Yeah, the ICE agents, the CBP agents are starting to mix it up, trying to blend in. They'll have one license plate number on the rear of the vehicle, a different license plate number on the front. And then every night they switch them around. For the first time, it's been reported the use of HC smoke, hexachlorothane, a type of tear gas that can cause permanent damage, illness, even potentially cancer, now being used. This stuff is so harsh, it's been banned for military use. In a suburb just outside of Portland, it's been reported that ICE agents are disguising themselves as utility workers. Uniform, hat, clipboard, knock on the door. Oh, got to check your meter. Yeah, this is what the secret police are up to. Ground zero is still the Twin Cities. Thousands of ICE agents swarming the area. Obey or suffer, comply or die. And the irony of threatening the Insurrection Act when the people of Minnesota are not rebelling against the nation, they're fighting for the nation, against unlawful, unconstitutional thugs, state-sponsored terror. I mean, let's be clear, they're breaking every law in the book, where neighbors and observers are simply trying to protect each other. It has grown into wider protests. And are they trying to impede ICE operations? Yes, they are. Good for them. I call that good old-fashioned civil disobedience. I do not call it an insurrection or rebellion. Anything they're doing is certainly not punishable by death. That's how they justified the Renee Good killing, because she was disrespectful. Respect authority without question. Comply or die. That's bad enough in and of itself, even under the very best circumstances. But this is a private, fascist army, threatening, terrorizing, beating, and killing. And this military and paramilitary in the street goes back to the first Orange regime, attempting, and now succeeding, it appears, to normalize this behavior. Normalizing. Don't let them get into your head. Do you remember when masked, unidentified feds threw Black Lives Matter protesters into unmarked vans? Do you remember that? In the summer of 2020, the George Floyd protests? Unidentified, masked federal agents at night under cover of darkness. They were only discovered by the protesters themselves, who brought it to the attention of the press. Do you remember that video? Seeing it for the first time? Secret police manhandling and tossing folks into unmarked vans. Do you remember how shocked we were? It was difficult to believe at first. We couldn't believe our eyes, how shocking this was. Well, now it's normal procedure, done in the light of day, in front of hundreds of witnesses and news cameras. Every day, all day, and the next day, and the next. That's what you call normalizing. And he wants to do this in city after city, town after town. He wants to engulf the entire nation. He wants to put the entire nation under the boot of his private SS army. These state-sanctioned terrorists, these paramilitary militias, will help the regime to intimidate voters or even cancel the upcoming elections. People scoff. They say it's crazy. It's not. How many times has he floated the idea of not having elections or not needing elections? I've lost count. There was another one just the other day in that Reuters interview. When you think of it, we shouldn't even have an election, he said, the orange meat puppet, at the direction of Miller and Vogt. Now, the regime is already doing everything it can think of to screw with the upcoming midterm elections. I don't think it takes much imagination to assume that this show of military force on the streets, starting in LA and Chicago and DC, and now an exponential uptick in the severity, the lawlessness, the reckless cruelty we're seeing in Minneapolis. It's a dress rehearsal for creating chaos and intimidation in swing districts. The regime doesn't have to blanket the whole nation with troops. They've got their pollsters and analysts and strategists like everybody else. They know which congressional districts to target. But I don't want to talk about the elections. They're still almost a year away, and that is a damn long time. The fight, as it stands today, is being waged by the good people of Minnesota. Friends and neighbors, going above and beyond, quite literally. They shouldn't have to be doing this. State and local governments do have power. And if you just read the headlines or see a YouTube statement from Mayor Fry or Governor Walz, you may think they're fighting back. I don't see it. I really don't see it. Mayor Jacob Fry has already backpedaled, emphasizing the idea of not taking the bait. Don't take the bait. Well, of course I agree with that. I'm constantly preaching nonviolence, always. But that's his central message right now? That's his top line? Warning that cops can't fight the feds. What does he mean the cops can't fight the feds? Again, not untrue, but what are his cops doing? What's their job? Their job is to protect the public. So when law-breaking marauders are dragging people out of their cars, out of their homes, They're beating them, they're tasing them, they're choking them. Don't the Minneapolis police have some responsibility? Jacob Frey, for all of his good looks and profanity, I don't understand what he's doing. And I'd say the same thing about Governor Walz. Now, Governor Walz and Mayor Frey are being investigated by the DOJ. There's another in a long line of bogus investigations of political opponents of the regime. And the irony here, that they're claiming that Walz and Frey are impeding federal law enforcement, when, as I just said, they're really not. They're not impeding at all. I'm asking them to impede. But, of course, the regime is too stupid to know that. They can't fathom the fact that people are standing up on their own. I mean, who would fight for their neighbors, especially neighbors of color? They're incapable of imagining it because they are vile, twisted degenerates. But with every new iteration of the regime's fascist takeover, we face the same problem. Where are the Democrats? Where's the opposition party? The House, just days ago, passed a large spending bill that hands over another $10 billion to ICE, to DHS, in addition to the billions they got in the very big, very bad bill. Democrats voted for this funding. Now it still has to pass the Senate, and once again, we look pleadingly, naively to the Democrats of the Senate. Passage requires 60 votes. Republicans can't do it alone. The Democrats have to hand it to them. And they will. They will fold, I'm sure. Be happy to be wrong about that. Just at a time when we need them to be bold, we need them to be disruptors, fighters. Democrats are also debating among themselves about, we don't want to say abolish ICE, that's too strong. They're comparing it to the defund the police phrase. They're doing literally nothing. Gavin Newsom, whose main job description these days is to talk on podcasts, caved to right-winger Josh Shapiro. Oh yeah, ICE has a job to do. We don't want to criticize them too much. We don't want to defund ICE, no. I tell you, this slate of corporate Democrats running for president, you guys, just don't. So there are some smatterings of local and state governments doing the right thing, but there's very little, and there's literally nothing coming from the Dems in Washington. And in addition to government, I'm asking again, where are the other large institutions of this nation? The silence is deafening. The major law firms, large businesses, churches, sports leagues, Hollywood, where's the movie? So we're forced to go back to the same sermon we've been preaching for over a year, maybe several years now. It's up to us. And we're seeing it in real time. We're seeing it live streamed from the neighborhoods of Minneapolis. Now, I'm the last person to give them any advice. I'm just in awe of their bravery, their creativity, their tenacity. So I'm not here to give them any advice at all. But I will remind those of us here gathered in this audio space in the moment to remember we cannot win a violent fight. Violence has no place in our response to the regime. Witnessing, yes. The so-called legal observers, yes. The mutual aid, it's massive, springing up everywhere, helping with food, rent assistance, transportation. We have to continue to educate each other, to educate ourselves, stay well informed. And it's one thing to fight, to resist, to hold our ground, but it's another to defeat the regime, which really is what it's all about, right? And for that, it's especially important that we denounce all violence. Because A, it's just wrong. It reduces us to their level. And B, it will never work. It cannot work. It's just very, very bad strategy. So for those reasons, violence is off the table. And I think here language is important. I don't think the word peaceful is being used effectively because it seems to exclude the idea of disruption. And disruption is the single most important element of our strategy. At least I think it should be. The partnership of local and state governments, the witnessing, the mutual aid, the education, all of those things are very important. They're all necessary components, but none of them are sufficient without disruption. All are necessary, none are sufficient without disruption. The number one central component. We have to shut down systems. That's not peaceful. It's not timid, passive, which I'm afraid, just strictly speaking language here, the word peaceful seems to suggest. I'm not against being peaceful. I'm saying the word itself is not constructive. In fact, it's misleading. We have to block traffic. We have to disrupt normal business, occupy buildings, block entrances, work slowdowns, call in sick. Whatever slows down, disrupts, or even shuts down normal business, that's got to be our business. Nonviolence, yes. The marching in the streets, the chanting, the singing, the signs, the giant puppets, it's all great. I'm not against it. Keep it up. But it must be in concert with dedicated, strategic disruption of systems. Now be careful. Use your training. Document everything because they lie. And they'll not only lie about what you're doing, they're going to send agitators, right-wing infiltrators into your marches, into your demonstrations to create violence. That's exactly what they did in the summer of 2020. Black Lives protesters were not violent. Some violence erupted spontaneously from people in the neighborhood. Most violence, and this has been proved now, it's in the data, most violence came from right-wing agitators and from the cops themselves. So be careful out there. Lawmakers, CEOs, the people who currently hold the power will do nothing until they're forced to, until they have no choice. They will never do the right thing out of the goodness of their hearts. They have to be brought to their knees. And the only thing that will bring them to their knees is if we shut down their system. Because as bad as the situation is in Minneapolis, it's not even about that anymore. It's about whether or not you want to live in a democracy. If you want any semblance of social or economic justice, as opposed to a totalitarian oligarchy where all of us are peasants and all of our rights are derived at the whim of a handful of autocrats. That's where we are. All right. This and all episodes can be heard at the website charlespurcell.com or on your favorite podcast platform. Follow on Substack and Blue Sky. Remember, the Daily Log, Monday through Saturday, can be heard exclusively on Substack. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio in Milwaukee. Peter Donalds wrote and performed our theme song. All right. I love you. I'll see you out there.